Hi, Margaret Fago here. Have a new set of classes coming up. We are going to be exploring flowers. My first lesson, which actually is going to take a little while, is called Profusion of Color. And what I'm going to want to do, well, I've already started it. You see this first little stage of it here. We're going to start with a big wet and wet, get some beautiful colors onto the page, and then come back in and start working with negative painting to define everything. But before we start doing any of that, we have to figure out what our composition is going to be, get the layout on the page where everything's going to be so that it will turn out the way I want it to. So let's go ahead and dive in and start getting a pencil on the page. This time around, I am going to be working with flowers and calling this particular exercise, this particular painting, an exuberance of color, because I want to be able to do the color fairly loosely and then come back in, do the color that runs all the way through here pretty loosely, and then come back in and do what we call negative painting around some of this to get the background in. But before I start doing anything at all, I need to think about what the composition is like and get this information onto my page. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at is that the flowers basically run through a diagonal in through here, narrow here, widening out, so it's almost like a triangle in here of these flowers. And then there's a dark passage up above here that passes through these flowers and comes into here just a little bit and down in here. So in a way, there's a triangle of dark that runs back in through there, and another little small triangle of dark that runs in through here. None of these greens are super bright. If anything, they run a little toward the yellow side. And so that yellowy green goes nicely with this red, which is leans a little toward the orange side. So those are some of the compositional things we need to think about. And then to get that set into my mind, I like doing what's called a thumbnail drawing. So we're going to make a little patch on my page here that's 2 inches, 3 inches by 2 inches. We don't want it too big. If it's too big, I'll be tempted to do lots of detail, and I don't want to do lots of detail. So what did I say? We had a triangle that runs through here, coming off into the back there. It has a little bit of an edge on it. So this is basically the shape of where those flowers are. Now, the other important thing is the edges of these flowers, that we get some of that shape happening in here, and it's all got to fit within this triangle. And there's another flower that runs over in here. And so then we're sort of thinking too, you know, how are we going to remove anything that's here? Are we going to add anything? And then these ones sort of go into a clump back here. Now, these flowers up here are our lightest ones, but right behind them, and let me get in with my really dark pencil here, right behind them is this dark triangle. Remember we said there was this dark triangle that ran back in through. So there's this dark triangle. I got to bring this right up next to those flowers so we can see it. There's this darker, and there's some light patches in it, but it's basically a dark shape back there. So that is our dark triangle back there, and then it passes through, but there's a little bit of something, a couple of crossovers that keep it from going all the way through, and then it works its way down into here a little further, comes up in on this flower, it's dark underneath of that flower, comes down into a bit of a triangle end there. There's some flower buds in here that may get eliminated eventually. Just working this so that we get that feeling of what that dark's going to do back there. And then it goes into a mid-tone in here with some lighter patches in it. And let's just come in nice and tight on some of these flowers so that the flower shapes are really standing out. And then there's that edge there. And what we're wanting to do is saying, you know, is this going to work? Is this really an interesting combination, or should we do some changes on it? So over in here, we've got a broken space that still is somewhat dark. And then in here, it's mid-tone. Go into a mid-tone. There's some light patches in there. Now on my flowers, these three are the lightest. Those are the next lightest. Those are a little bit darker. So these are going to be mid-tone with some dark spaces in between them. Make them stand out. Dark spaces. These dark spaces are going to be important, as we can see. It's going to be part of what makes it look interesting. It's going to have some broken spaces up here, still a little bit dark, and that's mid-tone, but a little lighter than this mid-tone. This mid-tone, mid-tone, mid-tone. Okay, that's mid-tone broken with light, and it's a little bit darker here. And then the flowers, they're, just notice that they are a little bit darker on one side. Okay. So this gives us a pattern, a piece to work with to say, hey, this is how it's going to work. Now we could also do a color patch like this to sort of determine how the colors are going to work, but I don't think I need to do that so much. But the next thing I do need to do is actually do the drawing of this piece. Now what I'm going to do to transfer this to my page is that I am going to determine halfway through this piece. Let's see, I'm going to use my other pencil here. 5.5 inches, 5.5 inches, and this should be 8.5 by 11, isn't it? So 4.25 and 4.25. And then I'm going to lightly draw this line through here so that we can see where it's going to end up. So what I'm ending up with now is that I have 4 quadrants. 4 quadrants that I have stuff in them. And then I can see how much, you know, what's in which quadrant, so that as I'm putting it onto my page, I can do a much better job of determining exactly how to put this in there. We could break those up into even smaller quadrants. Now let's get my watercolor paper out here, and yes, the watercolor paper is basically the same size as my drawing pad here. So when I go to do my final drawing, I can just do it right onto this page. So now let's go ahead and make the 4 quadrants on this as well. So we are 9 by 12 on this, I believe. So we're 4.5, so it'll be slightly bigger than that photograph. Not a lot, but slightly bigger. And 12, yes, so 6. I mean, one other way I could do this, but I'm not willing because I want to actually experience what those shapes look like, is that I could trace this. I could trace it onto a tracing paper and then use a transfer paper to transfer it onto my watercolor. And you know, anytime you feel like you're going to be, you know, I will still be doing transfer paper to transfer this onto my watercolor sheet, because I'm going to get the drawing done on my drawing pad here first and then transfer it to my watercolor paper. The reason I want to do that is that so it's fairly complex. I've got quite a bit to figure out here. And so I want to be sure and get all the details the way I want them before I transfer them to my watercolor paper. If I don't, and I'm doing a lot of erasures on the watercolor paper, I'll damage the surface of the paper, and we don't want to do that. Our drawing. This is my center point. This is my center point right here, and we can say that that flower, that center flower there, is going to be coming in right in here and comes up above that center point. It's possible I'm making this flower slightly bigger than what I'm seeing there. You know, there's a bud sticking out. There's a bud sticking out right in here that I don't want. I'm going to just leave that off. It's something that if I was tracing, I might not see that, and I would put that in and then go, why in the world did I have that there? Is that another flower underneath of there? It's a petal underneath of there. Okay. And let's see, I can also see that I have one of the petals that has color on it comes in through there. That's another petal there. What I really need to start with is to have my outlines, my outside shape. The inside we can worry about later, although sometimes it's nice to identify that as well. So let's say my line comes through here. So this flower, and it sticks out into here, goes through that line, and then it's down on that other side of it. We have a petal that we're looking at almost straight on, so we can just see the front of it there. And there's a petal that comes out there. And then right underneath of here is one more flower. There's a nice little negative shape right in there. Let's see, which means this comes over here just a little further. So I'm going to continue working on drawing this. As you can see, this quadrant down here is not going to have very much in it. Actually, there's some flowers down in here, but I'm not going to worry about them too much. I do have a stem that I might be interested in that's coming right into here. Stem goes up that way. Okay. And then the rest of my flowers are going to work up into this quadrant, so I'm going to go ahead and do that drawing and then come back and we will talk some more. My drawing down here, and I added a couple of other points of interest on the page here. Remember, we had divided it into 4, but I also divided it again into thirds so that I could see where this box in the center was. That was 1/3 here, 1/3 there, 1/3 there. And so this is the center third of the painting. Now, one of the compositional methods that works pretty well is to have your center of interest, the thing that's most important, somewhere on this box. And try not have it right in the middle. You can have something in there, but not your center of interest right in the middle. And looking at this photograph, these 3 flowers, as far as I'm concerned, are the center of interest. And perhaps this flower is our real total center of interest. These 2 are the supporting actors, and then everybody else are the chorus line in the back. And then the background is, the background. It's the part that helps tie it all together. It gives it a landscape for it to live in, but it's not the center of interest. The center of interest, we're going to want to be looking at this flower right here with its 2 buddies. Now, I have it very nicely right here on the edge of that box. This little guy here, who is part of that main character group, is pretty darn close to the center. And so I have a feeling that what I may end up wanting to do is shift everything maybe 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch over to this side to keep that guy off the center. Either that, or I could pull him down a little bit. Maybe that would work better, is to pull him down just a little bit, because these guys are in such a good place, and if I get them too close over here, they're not going to work so well. So that's what we're going to be doing on that. My drawing is pretty much complete here. Let's just clean off a few little pieces so I won't get confused when I draw it. Over in here, I just did a contour drawing, and I put some little marks in here on where there is this yellow area with a little marking in the flowers, so that I don't lose where those are when I go to work on this. So let's see. I just took this something here that I feel like this should come out and be a little bit further that way, so that that'll be a little further. There's the stamens and pestle, the center of the flower there. There's some stamens that come off through in there that are important. This one you can't see them very well in it, but that's fine. You can see that beautiful color in there. So those three. And so we're going to drop this little guy down a little bit. I could do it by cutting it. I can also do it by shifting it a little bit when I draw the paper. This is what's called graphite transfer paper. Basically what it is it has pencil graphite on one side of it so that you can use that to transfer onto your watercolor paper. So that's the side, this is the side that has the graphite. This is the side that doesn't. So it's a little bit lighter on the side that doesn't have the transfer paper. So I'm going to take this out of my drawing pad, get my drawing pad out of here, bring down my painting that I'm going to work on. So I'm working on a block, Arches cold press 140-pound block. I like working on these. It's more expensive to buy the paper this way, but it's pre-stretched. It's not going to move around as much on you when you go to put on the wet washes. So this is going to fit on here, right on where that block is. Let's go ahead and tape that in place. And I didn't get my tape here, but I want to keep this so that it's not going to move around too much while we work. So I'm just going to tape it here to the top of the block, and then I can lift the bottom up a little bit to look, but I want to tape it in two places so that it is going to keep there pretty steady. So I put down the graphite transfer paper with the graphite toward my watercolor paper, and then set this in on top of it. Get that lined up really good. Now, you know what I think I'm going to do when I move this is I'm just going to draw it down a little bit. Now, depends on how fresh your graphite transfer paper is. Mine is pretty hard and it doesn't go down really easy. So I like to use a ballpoint pen to do this with. It also means that I can see where I've been. So let's start with this one that I want to move just a little bit. So I want to get him a little off of this center and move him this way and that way just a little bit. So I'm going to just take and follow those lines that I had, but move them over a little bit. I'm just doing that petal, and then this petal is going to be in just a little bit. So it's just coming over just a little. And there's another petal in here. Yes, there was another little petal in there, that's right. When you start doing this, it's really easy to get confused and go, oh, what in the world was I doing? There we go, and then there's one more petal that runs off the edge of that and into there. Okay, so that one's done, except for, oh, let's mark this. And that's where that yellow is going to be. There's a stem that comes down off the bottom of this. It's going to join to this stem down here. I did put in a couple of leaves, not very many, but a couple of leaves that are associated with this stem. I only want to do my detail work here. Everything else is going to be a little soft in the final painting. So I'm not worrying about getting anything other than the silhouettes on the rest of that. Get that all the way off the edge. Just putting down enough pressure. Now let's make sure I'm actually getting it on my page. We'll lift it up here, look, and make sure that it's actually going down. It's pale, but I can see it. And I don't know if you can see it up there, but it is pale. Okay. And get my head out of here. I have a tendency to forget that this camera takes a nice picture of the top of my head. If I get it too far in, don't want to do that. Old lady eyes. Want to get close to things. And let's see here. I've got my picture right over here. I'll put it here. Maybe you guys can see it a little bit if I put it there. This is yellow here. So, and the shape comes across like that, and shape across through there. And then there's stamens running up into here. Some shadows and things running across here too, but I'm not going to worry about any of that right now. We can decide if we're going to put those in later. We may or may not. Depends on how detailed one wants to get. Sometimes I find it's really easy to start getting more detail than you really should in a painting. If you put in too much, then it just gets confusing. So a lot of this is sort of deciding, you know, what is the most important. Let's see, that's that back flower back there. Okay, there's a space right in there. And yeah, and it goes a little more. Ah, I didn't have it drawn quite right. That's why. All right, this is the forward flower, and it could come down here just a little bit. So now I'm getting this main part of these flowers in here, and get a little bit of a completed the drawing. It's pretty light, but I can see it if I look carefully. Let me just lift it up here a little bit so that maybe it's a little more visible. So all I've done on the drawing is the outlines of things. So I have my main flowers. I have my main flowers put in. I have these shapes put in. Our next thing, and I'm keeping my little thumbnail here to remind myself where my light and dark patterns are going to be, because it's really easy once you get working on this to think only about the colors and not about what's going to happen with the light and dark patterns. Thinking, oh, red and green. Well, it's not bright greens. These are bright reds, but not bright greens. Dark greens, mid-tone greens, yellow greens. And then the flowers are pretty bright and beautiful. I played around a little bit with colors and trying to decide which red I'm going to use to start with. I am going to start with vermilion and New Gamboge. Now I could, instead of vermilion, I could use, this is Naphthol red. Cadmium red could be used as well. You have to be a little bit careful with cadmium red because it has so much particulate matter in it. It's a fairly opaque color and tends to muddy up really easily. So I'm thinking I want to use this vermilion instead. It is not as opaque, and it's a beautiful orange red. So I will put the vermilion into my pan here and get enough of it that can really work with it. I'm using Daniel Smith's vermilion, but it is available with other brands. And then let's get the rest of these colors out of my pan here. I'm going to need to mix some of these colors with just a little bit of water. So I'll just put a little bit of water in here, mix some of this. I don't want to mix it all down in there. I just want to make a little puddle that has a medium. So the consistency on this is about the consistency of, I want to say, non-fat milk. So I'm going to add just a little bit more water to that. Great. So that's about the consistency of non-fat milk. And now I'm going to need to have a puddle that is yellow, and I should have done it first. I'm going to wash that brush in a minute, but I forgot to bring a second thing of water out, and so I'm not being careful here. So I want to mix up some yellow. The vermilion was straight out of the tube, and so it really mixed super easy. My yellow has been sitting here drying in the pan, And so I'm going to need to work it a little bit more to get myself a little pile of yellow. I'll be using the yellow down in where those leaves are to begin with as well. So we're going to start this painting with what one of my former instructors called the wishy-washy wash. In other words, I'm going to paint a road map in wet and wet of where the basic colors are going to be. I'm okay with the fact that the red's going to bleed beyond where the flowers are, because there's darks up in here, there's darks underneath. None of these greens are really bright greens. So I'm going to be using a mixture of red and yellow for my first wash, and we will go from there. So let's, I can have that water just a little bit wet with yellow, but I didn't want it wet with red or muddied up with red because I want some of these yellows to be very clean. So let's go ahead and dampen this page with my water that has just a very small touch of yellow in it. I'm working flat right now. When I'm doing a wet and wet like this, sometimes it's nice to work flat because you don't want the colors to run a whole lot. You want them to sort of settle into the places that you assign them. So I'm just dampening this down. Now the question is, how damp do we get it? Today is a really warm day, and it's probably going to dry super fast. So I'm going to wet this maybe a little more than I would otherwise. I'm going to let this sort of settle in. You do want to sort of wet it and then wait just a minute to let that water go down into the page. If you start too soon, then all the petals will be up on the top. But I want to sort of wait and let this, so that the super sheen with lots and lots of water floating on the top is going to go away. And it's still going to be shiny, but I won't have any puddles on the top. I'll just look at that sideways, make sure I got it wet all the way around. All right, sounds good. Now, let's come in with our yellows. So my yellows are going to go everywhere the greens go, and there'll be a little bit of yellow in some of those flowers. So let's just go ahead and think about that. Where's my lines? Okay, so I can come up into this flower a little bit with some of that yellow, and then we have yellow down in where this is going to be. So it's going to thin because my page is wet. It's thinning that down some, and there's some yellow that runs into these flowers. There's a flower up there, a little yellow there. My lines are pretty light here. And, okay, that's going to get it. There's actually some yellow that goes into the bottom of that petal. This petal right here gets a little bit of yellow in it. Now these stems, I wonder if I want to lift out a little bit on those stems, and I can do some yellow up into what's going to be this dark area up here. That yellow can be a little thicker because it's going to be darker up in there, and it's going to turn greens up in there eventually. So we're finding our way. And as long as I don't have this overly wet, so it's just a little bit wet, it will move, but it won't go flooding everywhere. So that's probably the trickiest thing with doing wet and wet, is knowing how wet to have it while you're working. Okay, so now this brush had red on it. Let's just see what's going to happen with that red. Yes. So this is just going to be a light red now. We'll darken it more when we do another layer on top of there. I'm just going to come in and start finding where these flowers are going to be. Let's see, there was a space. Boy, my lines are disappearing already. Not worried about any details at this point. We're just, and I don't mind if this bullet goes off and paints beyond where this red's going to be, because I'm going to come back in and I'm going to paint around this. I just want to get the big shape of how this red space is going to work across through here, basically roughing it in. That works its way down into there. Oh, this is a pretty space. So isn't it nice how you can sort of get a space here and define it without going into any of the details. I'm going to come back and put some more yellow in on top of this because it'll push it away a little bit, I hope. And as this dries, it's going to move less away, but I still want it pretty thin. I don't want to get this paint down too thick yet, because if I do, then, and there's actually a little bud right there that I rather like. That's that guy, yeah, and that can move up into there. And then there was a flower up in here. I don't know if you can see, but the cat has joined me for the painting demo here. But she's been good, sleeping rather than coming into the painting. Okay, and there's going to be a little more red down in here somewhere. There's another one that's going to be here. It sort of comes off that side. Okay, pattern of red. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Okay, let's see if I can come down here maybe a little bit more. Now let's come back in with my yellow a little drier on the brush. Get my rag here. Rag's very important on how to dry that brush so that we don't have too much paint. Just got a little bit of yellow, and let's try and throw some yellow into these and see if it's going to push that away. Yes, good. That's what I was hoping. If I just sort of touch that yellow onto there where that's going to go in, it's a little bit wetter than what the red was, and it's pushing that red away. And it depends if my red's too thick, and we'll just see down here whether this is going to work. Oh no, it's working. It's pushing that away. I like that. Pushing that away. And there's a little more yellow over in here. Let's get a little fresher yellow on that brush. If I have too much red with it, then we're going to be putting orange in and not yellow. And down in here too, there's some yellow spots. Where else? One more set right there. And this guy had some yellow with it there. And now here, it felt like that red was a little darker. I'm gonna do just a little lift with my damp brush, dry my brush, damp brush, and I'm gonna just do a little lift and then drop some yellow into that. Okay, I think this was one other spot. As long as this is a little bit wet, it'll do this. It'll push it away, and it's going to push it away and do some things like this where we're getting a little halo of color. And I'm going to just push this up that way a little more too. Drop some more yellow into there. Okay, I think I need to stop at this point. Let this dry completely, and then we're going to come back in and start doing background painting and more color to bring out the liveliness of the colors in the foreground. So we've got the pattern of the reds running through here, and then we'll be working the greens and yellows in the background and bringing out the color of those reds. I'm not worrying about where the light and darks on those reds are yet. We'll get the rest of that figured out later.